it's Erica. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in May. Even though things were busy in the last couple weeks, I did manage to read about 13 books this month, so I have lots to talk about. The first book I read in May was Champion by Marie Lu. This is the third and final book in the Legends trilogy, and this is a YA dystopian trilogy. Nearly everyone on BookTube has heard of this trilogy before, so I won't go into too much detail about it. Basically, there's this mutated virus that has taken over the Republic, and people are trying to find a cure for it. I really liked this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was a really good end to the trilogy. I really liked how the author balanced the romance and the relationship and all of the action that occurred in this final book. This book and this trilogy in general follows the relationship between Day, who is the Republic's most wanted criminal, and June. And June has grown up on the rich side of the Republic. These two characters meet and have a relationship. Things really develop between them in the first and second book. And speaking of their relationship, I really liked how their relationship was handled near the end of the novel, and I really liked that epilogue. I found the epilogue in the final book to be really realistic, and it kind of set up that the fact that June and Day would find their way back to each other more realistically and naturally in the future, so I really liked that epilogue. I know that some readers don't really like how the ending of this trilogy happened, but I really liked it. In my personal opinion, it was appropriate and more realistic and natural. The next book I read in May was Something in the Way by Jessica Hawkins. This is the first book in a new adult romance series, and it follows this girl named Lake and this guy named Manning. Lake is a 16-year-old girl, and she meets Manning because Manning is the construction worker that's working near her house over the summer. But Manning is 7 years older than Lake, and Lake develops strong feelings for him, but Manning is determined to keep her at arm's length. He wants her to keep her innocent and doesn't think it's right for them to get together since there is such a big age gap. Also, even though Lake saw Manning first, her older sister Tiffany saw him next. So there's a love triangle between Lake, her older sister Tiffany, and Manning, since they both like Manning. There's so much angst between Lake and Manning in this book as Manning tries to fight his feelings for Lake. There's a lot of back and forth between these two characters in the book. Also, since Tiffany has set her sights on Manning, Manning is also in a sort of pseudo-relationship with Tiffany as well in this first book. I just loved the tension between these three characters in the book. It made the angst that much more complicated. I also liked learning about Lake and Tiffany's family relationships and how each daughter in this family is viewed by their parents. I believe I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. The relationships were the focus in this book, but I think the family dynamics definitely added more depth to Lake as a character and more dynamic to the book in general. This book reminds me of A Love Letter to Whiskey by Candy Steiner, which I read sometime last year. It definitely has the same level of angst and that same level of tension between the characters for sure. The next book I read was Somebody Else's Sky by Jessica Hawkins. This is the second book in the series, and I also really enjoyed it. I also gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Given that the previous book ended on a cliffhanger, we definitely pick up a few months after the cliffhanger to see where the characters' lives are now. I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't read this series, but Manning doesn't really have much of a relationship with Lake in this book, and he instead starts a relationship with Tiffany. Even though Tiffany is considered a mean character who's often not very nice to Lake, I did like seeing the softer and more human side to her in this book. Tiffany is a complex character, and she often uses meanness as a front because of how she's viewed in her family. She doesn't feel like she gets enough attention at home. That's why she's often mean to Lake. But she does have a nicer, softer side to her, and I like that this book explored more of her character development. People who have read this series might not like Tiffany as a character at all, but I appreciated that she's a complex character and that she does have a purpose and she is actually a person underneath her tough front. Just like in the first book, there is angst between Lake and Manning in this book, especially towards the end of the novel, given what happens. I found that the series just kept on getting better and better with each book, and the second book ended with a cliffhanger and definitely a surprise. The next book I read was Move the Stars. This is the third book in this series, and finally Lake and Manning do get together. I did enjoy this book, but I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's the book in this series that I actually enjoyed the least. It takes some time for Manning and Lake to finally get together in this third book, but their relationship is short-lived due to a plot twist. I didn't like the plot twist in this third book. I thought it was an unnecessary roadblock to Lake and Manning's relationship. I could say that I wasn't surprised with the plot twist in this third book. With this plot twist, Lake and Manning's relationship is tested again. Because of this plot twist, Lake and Manning are separated after just shortly getting together. Even though I didn't find the plot twist surprising and I was a little frustrated with it, it totally paid off in the ending of this third book, when Lake and Manning finally decided to be together for real and for their future together. The ending to this book was so well written, and the dialogue in this ending was really so sweet, and it really encompassed what Lake and Manning are all about to each other. Lake and Manning really do go through some big character development in this book, and I really liked their growth as characters. Next up, I read Lake and Manning, the 4th and final book in the Something in the Way series. Now that Lake and Manning are finally together, we get to see a glimpse of their lives together, now that they're both committed to each other and want to stay in this relationship for the long haul. Lake and Manning are struggling to get pregnant, and it seems that everyone around Lake, including some of her friends, are getting pregnant, so she sort of feels left out and jealous of them. She feels like she's missing out on something. I really loved this final book much more than the previous one. I gave this final book 5 out of 5 stars. Not only does it really encompass the epicness that is Lake and Manning's love story, but I also like how the side storylines were tied up in this book, especially the relationship that developed between some of the side characters in this final book. It really wrapped up the series well, and it definitely was a great conclusion to this series. The next book I read after finishing that series was The Lost Code by Kevin Emerson. This is the first book in a YA post-apocalyptic trilogy. I didn't really like this book very much. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. In this book, the world is set in the future because most of the Earth's population has died off because of the sun's deadly rays. And these people all live in these domes where everything is fake but perfect. However, the characters in this book are sent to Camp Eden for the summer, and Camp Eden promises a camp experience where they get to experience the world like it was before the sun's deadly rays took over. We follow the main character named Owen, who is an immature character. He's really self-conscious and he doesn't really have that much social experience. The plot in this book was incredibly slow. We didn't really get to the start of the story until halfway through the book. This was too much of a slow start, in my opinion. I like the story and the action to start happening a little sooner. I also didn't like the writing style in this book. The book has lengthy paragraphs in it that describes the physical setting of the camp, and the writing style doesn't really spend enough time developing the world or the characters. We start with the main character, Owen, dying, and he's mysteriously brought back to life. But his internal dialogue throughout many parts of the book mentions the machines that are working to make his organs function and things like that. That was just too weird for me, and it made me feel distant from the character. Owen also meets this character named Lily, who's a lifeguard at the camp. She has an idea of what's going on with Owen, but she's not really sure. Owen's initially attracted to Lily, and they soon get together, but there's not really a development in their relationship, so I didn't really feel that the romance was believable. Like I said before, it's not until halfway through the book where the story really gets going, and a key part of the book is the mythology, where we get to find out more about Owen and what exactly is going on with him and why he's having these strange visions and things like that. It turns out he's a part of history and he's an Atlantean. We don't really get any answers as to Owen and his background or what his role is as an Atlantean. This isn't really touched at all in the book, so I didn't really like this part of the story. Even though it's the meat of the story, we don't really get any concrete answers or any explanation as to why Owen may have these powers or anything like that. I could tell that this book did have a similar tone to it because it was trying to be a young adult version of the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. That's sort of the vibe I got from this book, but it definitely fell short. There wasn't really a lot of positive aspects to me while reading this book, which is why I only gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I decided not to continue on with the trilogy. Once I read some reviews for the other 2 books, the story gets even worse and bizarre, so I'm definitely not continuing on with this trilogy. Next up, I read The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in an adult fantasy trilogy. This book is basically set in a post-apocalyptic setting where the characters in this book have no choice but every few months to endure a hard and cold winter. Also, characters in this world have the magical ability to move and influence the tectonic plates in society. These people who have these abilities have guardians, and the role of guardians in this world is to keep the powers of these people in check, to make sure that they don't cause disasters. There's a character named Emerson, who's a mother. She's recently had her son murdered by her husband, so she's determined to hunt him down and kill him. We also have this character named Senate that's in training to use these magical abilities to influence tectonic plates. And through this training, people have magical rings. As you acquire more rings, you master this magical ability, but I believe Senate has 4 magical rings. She's teaming up with this other character who is a master in this ability, so she's training with this individual character. Then we have a character named Damata, I think, and she's a small child that's just discovering that she has this magical ability. And she's traveling to this place with an older gentleman who's her guardian, and he's protecting her while she's discovering she has this ability to make sure that she doesn't cause havoc in society or disaster. I loved the world building. It was incredibly interesting, and I loved meeting the characters. You have to say that the narrative structure was hard to follow. It definitely took me some time to digest this story. It kind of throws the reader into the world without much backstory or explanation of things. I hardly ever read fantasy, let alone adult fantasy, but I read the 5th season in May because of the BookTube SFF Awards, and The Stone Sky, the 3rd book in this trilogy, is actually one of the BookTube SFF Awards nominees. So that's why I read the 5th season this month. Since the narrative structure made the plot somewhat confusing, especially the ending, I was confused about some certain aspects to this book, which is why I only gave it 3 stars. I did enjoy this book, but I did find it somewhat confusing. Once I finished reading this book, I also wasn't sure if I wanted to continue on with the rest of the trilogy. I'm looking forward to getting back to this trilogy in July. Now that I'm clear on the aspects that I was confused about, I'm interested to reread this book possibly in July and see how all the story threads come together. Next up, I read Keeping the Moon by Sarah Dessen. This is a YA contemporary standalone. It follows the main character named Coley, who is staying with her aunt for the summer since her mom is on tour. Her mom is a famous worldwide fitness instructor, and she goes on tour often for speaking engagements. Coley and her mom used to be overweight before she became the fitness instructor known as Kiki Sparks. Coley has also lost weight, like her mom, but she's still not really confident in who she is as a person. While staying with her aunt over the summer, Coley gets a job at a restaurant. She meets two new friends. The friend, I think, is named Margaret, and she doesn't really have a good relationship with her boyfriend. And through this relationship, Coley learns the importance of self-respect and the fact that the people that you're in a relationship with should treat you well. Coley is also friends with this girl named Isabel, who's in her early 20s, and she provides Coley with advice. Isabel is a really supportive friend to Coley throughout the book. Coley also meets this guy named Norman, who also works in this restaurant. The book does have a slight romance between Coley and Norman, but the book mostly focuses on Coley just really discovering herself as a person. Next up, I read Lock and Key by Sarah Dessen. I also gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. This book follows a girl named Ruby. Ruby has always been the adult in the relationship since her mom has always had a problem with drinking and drugs. Early on in the story, Ruby is abandoned by her mother. She lives for a few weeks on her own, but ultimately is forced to be taken in by her older sister, named Carla, who she hasn't seen in 10 years. Not only is Ruby's relationship with Carla strained at the beginning of the book, but she also needs to adjust to going to a new school. It's quite an adjustment period for Ruby since her whole life has shifted off course, and she's not really sure what happened between her and her sister all those years ago. She has one viewpoint, and her older sister views the situation in an entirely different way. The whole story focuses on Ruby and her relationship with her older sister, as well as her complex relationship with her mom and how this sudden abandonment has changed everything. Ruby also meets her new neighbor named Nate Cross, who seems to have it all together, and he's a very positive person. At first, Ruby isn't really interested in developing a relationship with him or even a friendship because it's really hard for her to trust people. She's used to being self-reliant and really independent because she's had no choice but to be that in the past, given her relationship with her mother. Throughout the story, Ruby learns that it's okay to trust others, and she starts to developing feelings for Nate. When they start a relationship together, Nate pulls back because of his past, and everything with Nate isn't what it seems. I really enjoyed reading this book. Ruby was a relatable character, and she was a really strong and independent character. I loved this about her. I also liked the side character of Jamie in this book. Jamie is Carla's husband, and he's the normal one in this book, since he comes from a loving and large family. He does things for Carla and for Ruby that they haven't had a chance to experience, given their background. Overall, I just really liked how all of the characters in this book were developed and just the personal journey that Ruby goes on. Since I was still in a contemporary mood, I decided to read Along for the Ride by Sarah Dessen. This book follows a girl named Auden. Auden has had a strained relationship with her father since her parents divorced, so the fact that she's spending the summer with him comes as a surprise. Auden's father is self-centered and doesn't really pay that much attention to Auden. Also, she feels caught in the middle of her father's relationship with his new wife, and she sort of sees the same things happening in this new relationship that caused her parents' divorce. Throughout the summer, she also meets this guy named Eli at a bike shop. I really liked their interactions together, but it felt like the plot and the relationship between them was just a little underdeveloped. I wanted more from the relationship and the story in general. So I naturally continued with What Happened to Goodbye by Sarah Dessen. This book follows a girl who I can't remember the name of right now. She's spending the summer with her dad, and her dad is a consultant for different restaurants around the country, and it's his job to go into these restaurants and make them the best they can be. I actually don't remember much about this book since I only gave it 2 stars. I didn't really like it that much. I felt that the plot dragged on quite a bit, and nothing much happened given the length of the book. I also didn't like the friendships that the main character had. The friendships that the main character had were just thrown in the book, and they didn't really have much of a purpose at all. Since her parents divorced, she's been traveling to multiple places with her dad's job. Because of that, she's never really had a chance to put down roots anywhere. So the main character is just coming to terms with the changing dynamics of her family. Also, the main character meets this love interest, whom I can't remember the name of either. They just have a series of awkward interactions throughout the novel and not really much of a romance or even a budding relationship whatsoever. I didn't really like these interactions, and I didn't really feel that the love interest added anything to the story really, which is why I only gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read another book by Sarah Dessen called The Moon and More. This book follows a girl named Emmeline, who's always been happy with her life in the town of Colby. She's been dating her boyfriend Luke since freshman year, and she's not really looking for anything more in life. That all changes though when a new person comes to town named Theo. Theo is from New York, and he's in town shooting a documentary film about a local artist in Colby. Soon Emmeline is attracted to the things that Theo represents, and she thinks that she may want a life outside of Colby after all. Emmeline lives with her mom, her stepdad, and her 2 stepsisters. They've been her family for as long as she can remember. She's only recently reconnected with her birth father, since she refers to her stepfather as Dad and her father just as her father. She mostly has an email relationship with her father. However, a common topic of conversation is college. Her father thinks that it's important for her to consider an Ivy League education. He thinks an Ivy League education should give her a chance to get out of Colby and make something more of her life. Meanwhile, new developments happen in Emmeline's relationship with Luke in this book, and she starts developing feelings for Theo. However, Theo may not be the person that Emmeline thought he was. This book mostly centers around Emmeline discovering more about herself and coming to terms with where she comes from, since her parents had her when they were still teenagers, and how this past event has informed who her parents are as people, as well as her relationships with each of them. And the final book that I read this month was Saint Anything by Sarah Dessen. This book follows the main character named Sydney and her role in the family now that her older brother, her Peyton, has been incarcerated. Nothing has been the same in Sydney's family since her brother Peyton has been incarcerated. Her parents' lives all revolve around Peyton, to the point where Sydney feels invisible in her own family. In this book, Sydney meets the Catham family, who run a local family pizza joint. And through meeting the Catham family, she feels a sense of friendship and belonging that she hasn't had in so long. She develops a friendship with her new friend Layla. She starts to have feelings for Layla's older brother, named Mac. Throughout the story, Sydney realizes that she does have a voice, and she learns how to use it. Sydney has a complex relationship with her mother in this book. This book had such emotional depth to it, and it definitely had a more serious tone to it in comparison to Sarah Dessen's other books, which I really enjoyed. I consider Saint Anything to be one of Sarah Dessen's best books. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It's best to go into this book blind without knowing much about the story. It has so many layers to it, and it's really emotional. Those are all of the books that I read in May. Comment down below and tell me what was your favorite book that you read in May. If you want to see more videos from me, I'll put some videos up on the screen in case you guys want to check those out. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you really enjoy my content. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one.